Story 1. Women do not all have their menstrual period at the beginning of the month worldwide at the same time. Story 2. How a shower curtain works. I kept finding the bathroom floor absolutely soaked after my roommate showered. I gently asked her to make sure the shower curtain was fully closed. Kept happening. Finally, I figured out she had been drawing it closed with the bottom fully outside the tub. Okay, sigh. So I drew her a diagram showing that if you put the bottom of the curtain inside the tub, then the water routes back into the tub rather than onto the floor. She said, "Oh, you and your science." Then next time she came out wrapped in a towel and asked, "Which way does the curtain go again?" We were both graduate students in Science Doctor of Philosophy programs. Story 3. I was picking up Italian lira one time in 1999 before the euro from a bank in Tennessee. The teller brought me the envelope. When I opened it to count the money, she looked at me with total surprise and asked, "Do other countries have different money?" A bank teller. Story 4. I work in retail. I had just rang up a customer for a pair of shoes. The total came to $97.19. He gave me a $100 bill. I gave him his change and receipt. His wife came in later to return them. I gave her $97.19. She said, "No, my husband gave you a $100 bill. I want the 100 back." I said, "He did, but his total was only $97.19, so I gave him change back." She persisted. She wanted her $100 back. I said, "Ma'am, your husband only paid $97.19, so that is what you get back when you return the item." She said, "He gave you $100. I want the $100 back." This was not some sort of quick change scam. This woman was just not understanding. I told her, "If you'd like to give me the $2.81 in change I gave him, I'd be happy to give you a $100 bill." She kept arguing with me for a minute, long enough for other people in line to speak up and tell her how mistaken she was. She eventually gave up and left with $97.19. Story 5. My husband had to explain to a coworker that she could not take a train from the United States to Europe. She insisted she had to because she did not like flying. Story 6. A girl was staying with my family and had brought her dog. The dog got hurt in a freak accident that required surgery on a back leg and the protective cone to be worn. At one point, she started cutting off a bit of the cone. "Me careful, cut too much and he will be able to reach his stitches." Her. "That's all right. He will be able to keep them clean." I had to explain to her very slowly that the purpose of the cone was to keep him from licking the stitches and pulling them out. She honestly thought the cone was just an aesthetic thing. Story 7. I had to explain to my mother that my daughter was growing in my uterus and not my stomach, so the hot sauce on my burrito was not going to cause her skin burns. I also explained that if she were growing in my stomach would certainly cause much worse burns than hot sauce. It was then that I understood why the school nurse had to explain to me in 5th grade why I kept bleeding through my pants every month at school, and not my mother. Story 8. When I worked at a doctor's clinic, a lady called wanting to book an appointment for her influenza vaccination. She specifically requested a telephone appointment. I could not believe I had to explain to her that we cannot administer an injection over the phone. Story 9. That driving north meant the whole trip was uphill. I laughed at her until I realized she meant it, then ended up laughing at myself because there was no way I was going to explain it to her. Story 10. I used to work at a daycare. One day, a little mouse entered the premises and caused an uproar until we caught it and released it in the playground. After the whole ordeal, one of my colleagues, who was the least intelligent person I have ever met, said, "Let's hope it did not lay eggs anywhere." I was too stunned to speak and just stared at her, while my room leader and friends said, in the most exasperated way, "Mice do not lay eggs," and walked off. I find it interesting that many people in these replies are trying to find a different interpretation of what she meant or suggesting she was joking. Unfortunately, I have to tell you she was completely convinced that mice lay eggs, because she even insisted on it later. Story 11. You need a printer to print things at home. Technical support, and I wish I were lying. Story 12. Dogs are artificially bred, and there are no wild golden retrievers, wild chihuahuas, or wild Maltese running around that we capture to make into pets. Story 13. It was at work. I had to explain that if they did not do their job, either I or the next shift would have to. Story 14. The red brake lights in his rearview mirror were not from the police. He hated driving at night for that reason. Story 15. The difference between the number 0 and the letter O when giving them a temporary password so they could access their account. The only thing I could think of was, one is a letter and one is a number, but it still did not click for them. Story 16. Birthdays. I work in information technology, and when we have new employees start, their default password is their birthday using the 2-digit month, day, and year format. I cannot tell you how many adults get confused about this. I often have to explain that January is 01, February is 02, and so on. Just yesterday, I had a person in their 40s start counting on her fingers trying to figure out what October was before typing in the wrong password 3 times. I finally just had to do it for her. This was not an isolated incident. I would say it happens with at least a third of new employees, all adults. Story 17. I worked tech support for an internet provider a few years back. A woman called in, complaining her Wi-Fi wasn't working. I went through the normal troubleshooting questions. What's your device? How are you connected? And finally, what can you see on your screen? Customer, it's black. Me, how do you mean? Are you getting errors? Customer, the whole screen is black. Me, have you turned the laptop on? Customer, I can't. Me, why not? Customer, I've lost the charging cable. Me, okay. Do you have another device I can help you connect with? Maybe a tablet or your phone? Customer, no, you need to get the laptop reconnected. Me, can you go and buy another charging cable? Customer, no, you need to send me one. Me, we don't supply them. Also, we didn't supply you with your laptop, we just provide internet. Customer, yes, and now you're not providing me internet, so you need to fix it. This went on for 40 minutes. As my team around me stared in disbelief that this woman couldn't understand why her internet provider couldn't connect Wi-Fi to a computer with no power. I remember hanging up the phone and putting myself on break. My manager looked at me and told me to take a walk while barely hiding her giggles. Story 18. A Coinstar machine was at the front of the grocery store where I worked. Walking by, I saw a woman struggling and asked if she needed help. She said she accidentally hit the Spanish instead of the English button on the start screen. I began to guide her through the directions. Feed your coins into the hopper, and it will count and sort them. At the end, take your receipt to customer service to get your cash. She was very annoyed and exclaimed, "But I don't want Spanish money." Sigh. Story 19. New Zealand, the country where we were both born, raised, and live, is not in Europe. To answer most of your questions, her reasoning is that when she fills out forms and has to select her ethnicity, she chooses New Zealand European. She thought that option was there because we are European and therefore in Europe. I had to explain that it means she is of European descent and that her ancestors lived in Europe. I also explained that not every New Zealander selects that option and that there are other ethnicities here as well. Story 20. I had to explain to someone that just because their grandfather's brother married a Native American, that did not in any way make them part Native. Story 21. Volunteered in a charity shop. A woman came to the counter with a top and asked if I could look in the back for one of the same color but a larger size. I tried to explain we do not do that because we are a charity shop. She insisted that other shops like H&M have done that for her. She would not take no for an answer. Eventually, I went to the back for a few minutes, made a cup of tea for a coworker, and came out saying we do not have any. She got mad at that too. Story 22. When you save a file on Microsoft Windows, the Save window lets you save the file into a specific folder. You do not have to go into your recent items to find it and then move it to where you want it to be saved. This person had been working an office job at a computer for more than 5 years at that point. Story 23. The Aztecs and Incas are not interchangeable. They were in completely different parts of the Americas, and neither of them built the Nazca lines, especially not the Aztecs, who were not in Peru. This person kept trying to tell me it was up to interpretation. But no, it is not. It is geography. Story 24. A friend asked me how the sun knows the clocks have changed when we have daylight saving time. Story 25. I work in travel. I have had to explain time zones more than you would believe. If you leave Sydney at 2 p.m. and fly approximately 14 hours, crossing the international date line, you arrive in Los Angeles at noon, about 2 hours before you left. I have seen this reaction happen in real time. Story 26. Insects are animals. I had to explain that to my friend in her 50s. Story 27. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Italy is not a town in France. My sister dated him for too long. Story 28. It is possible to get pregnant with the woman on top. Gravity does not prevent pregnancy. Story 29. When I was in the military, we had a new airman who I had to counsel on why it is important to shower, wear deodorant, and wash your clothes. We did not work in the field or on the flight line where it might have been more acceptable to have body odor. We worked in the medical group in patient care, and patients were complaining about his unpleasant odor. Apparently, his mother took care of his laundry his whole life and would remind him to bathe. Since he was on his own now, he simply had not really thought about it. Story 30. Her power was shut off because she did not pay her electric bill for 3 consecutive months. The power company sent letters on bright yellow paper to warn her about this. She believed she was legally entitled to free electricity because it is a requirement for human survival. To add, she was not in need. She worked a well-paying job and enjoyed shopping for expensive items. This was not a situation where she required assistance or mercy. She needed a lesson in responsibility, and the power company enforced the consequences. Story 31. I work in a long-term stay hotel. We get a lot of military personnel and work crews staying here. Several men in their 50s and older have asked me how to use the washing machines. They are not complicated. There are 4 options: cycle type, water temperature, soil level, and load or water amount. There is also a start button and a spot to put the detergent. Usually, their excuse is that their wife has always done it for them. I also had to talk with a manager who was making errors with payroll. When submitting people's times, if they worked for 7 hours and 30 minutes, she would input 7.3 hours instead of 7.5 hours. For 45 minutes of an hour, she used 0.45 instead of 0.75. I tried to explain it to her twice, but she could not understand. I eventually had to reach out to the area manager to inform him of the situation. Story 32. I had to explain to my 2 coworkers that it was not some magic fairy throwing away their coffee cups. They were joking one day that their old coffee cups always disappeared by the next day, and I had to tell them it was me. I started doing it because the cups kept getting left in the way and being knocked over. I was off for a few days and came back to find cups everywhere. Story 33. That I could not steal a button from her Viber application. I work at the printing shop, and elderly people often come and give me their phones to send files via email, Viber, or WhatsApp and print them. One day, an elderly woman, approximately 70 years old, came with her husband to print some documents. I turned on the Wi-Fi, connected it, and sent the PDF document via Viber. I printed it and said goodbye. The next day, she came to my shop furious, accusing me of stealing her direct photo send button on Viber. What happened was the application updated, and the button was moved to another place. I explained this, but she did not believe me. She was convinced I stole the button and demanded I return it. She argued with me for approximately half an hour until her husband asked her to stop. She never came back. Story 34. Orange juice from concentrate does not come from a place called concentrate. Story 35. An item damaged in a car crash did not qualify as a manufacturer defect covered under warranty. The store refund policy was 90 days, and she had a receipt over a year old. Story 36. Raw meat juices, especially those from chicken, should never come into contact with other foods. I learned this in 8th grade home economics when I was 13 years old. I had to explain to a 40-year-old that no, you cannot put grilled chicken back on an unwashed cutting board that still has raw chicken juices. Story 37. I have had to explain to parents that small children can have water in a bottle and that flavored drink mix is why their child has rotten teeth. Story 38. I had to explain to a restaurant worker that eggs are not dairy. Chickens do not have mammary glands. Someone who is allergic to dairy can eat eggs and chicken. Mayonnaise, containing eggs and oil, is therefore not dairy. She was looking at me as if I were the stupid one the entire time. Story 39. 1. The ticks on a male dog were actually nipples, and male dogs have nipples just like every other mammal. 2. A rabbit with visible testicles is male. 3. You cannot feed a strictly carnivorous animal, such as a ferret, a vegan diet. The ferret became very sick when fed this way. 4. When you have two animals of the same species but opposite genders in the house that are not spayed or neutered, they will breed. This applies even if they are mother and son, brother and sister, different ages, sizes, or breeds. Many people are surprised this happens, but it is basic biology. Story 40. We can both believe different things does not mean that one of us, Chris, is not flat out wrong. Story 41. How to make ramen. The directions are on the packet. I pointed that out and their response was, I thought it was too simple to have directions on it. Story 42. I hope this is appropriate for this community. I had to explain to a grown, college-educated adult that anal sex does not cause acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. If both parties are human immunodeficiency virus negative, they cannot create acquired immunodeficiency syndrome by engaging in this activity. No, Daniel, that is not how viruses work. Story 43. I had to explain to someone that you cannot buy 2 pounds of lunch meat and eat it for a month. The concept of food spoiling was new to him. To be fair, we were both college students and he was living alone for the first time. I used to work at a coffee shop and had to explain what filling something halfway meant to a woman I was training. She did not understand the concept of half. Story 44. Bocconcini, Parmesan, and feta are dairy cheeses. I used to work in a pizzeria and had to explain to a vegan couple on multiple occasions that these cheeses were all made from dairy. It got to the point that I had to grab the original containers and read the ingredients on the third try for them to understand. Story 45. My mother once had to explain to a fellow teacher that humans only have one appendix. Story 46. Where pineapples come from. Orcas and narwhals are real animals. Story 47. A small pizza is not the same size as a large pizza, even though they have the same number of slices. Story 48. The Venus flytrap was not an alien species that landed on Earth carried by a meteorite. It took several minutes of conversation to convince them that this was not true. Story 49. I had to explain to 2 teenage girls, aged 15 and 16, that the reason the candle went out was because they put the glass lid back on its jar. One of them said that fire can only be put out with water. I explained that fire needs oxygen and putting the lid back on cut the supply. When they did not understand after several explanations, I had to explain it to them like toddlers. Fire is hungry, so it eats the air. When all the air is gone, it goes to sleep. Bye-bye fire. The double O was too much. The look on their mother's face was so funny. She turned to me, threw her hands up and said, "I failed," in the most defeated tone. That poor woman. I would like to point out that we did, in fact, have a serious talk with these girls about proper fire safety and when not to use water on an open fire. Story 50. Her child, my child's half-sibling, could not have inherited a trait from my child because that trait was inherited from me. But they are brothers. Story 51. I had to explain to a fully grown adult that yes, your car's keyless entry remote does indeed have a battery in it, just like a TV remote. The button stopped working because the battery is dead, and you need to replace it. I also had to tell him that if you are going to buy large bags of dry dog food and keep them in your garage, which you leave open most of the time, you should actually close the bag and maybe even put the closed bag in a container with a lid instead of letting it sit completely open. Otherwise, you will wonder why the dog food is full of bugs, spoils quickly, and attracts rats and raccoons. I wish I could say he was a super brilliant engineer or something, but no. Story 52. New England is not part of Europe, as I have told 3 different people. Please improve the Arizona public school system. Story 53. I had to explain to a doctor's receptionist from Michigan once that Canada was not located somewhere mysteriously across the ocean. but rather across the border from Michigan. My mom and I spent the car ride home in stunned silence. Story 54. That black people in Europe are not called African Americans. Another one. Puppies do not come out of the mother dog's bottom. Story 55. That the sun was a star. No, it is not. It is the sun. I learned that when I was about 6. Story 56. I talked about this before and will until the end of days because this man deserves to be shamed. A 23-year-old man who had the right to vote, a driving license, a job, and could get married and start a family thought people were hanging the moon in the sky. Like the moon, Earth's natural satellite, was being hung in the sky like a painting on a wall. I'm still reeling over that one. This man had gone to school, had a formal education, and was actually going to college. He learned about that in primary school. And the kicker? I was the one to explain it to him because I was his girlfriend at the time. Let me tell you, things unraveled real fast when I started paying attention and saw through the smokescreen. He was willfully ignorant and completely stupid on top of it. He was really good at hiding it. I dropped him like the mess he was and dived into more and more books to compensate for the loss of brain matter I suffered from going out with him. Story 57. I had to explain to a friend who had grown up with me that no, you cannot vote for Donald Trump in the Australian election. He is not a candidate for anything here. Story 58. Cold sores are caused by the herpes simplex virus. I have also had to explain repeatedly that mice are not baby rats. Story 59. You do not have to use the exact computer you sent the email from to view your emails. You can log in from any device and access them. This was to my boss. Story 60. My brother's girlfriend, whom I had known for years, once started talking about a problem at work. She did not understand the numbers on the air conditioning unit. Apparently, she had never seen a weather forecast or never paid attention to one, and she could not associate a temperature with how hot or cold it was. She was around 25 years old or older. Story 61. I had to explain to a university classmate in an art class that red paint and white paint mixed together make pink paint. I thought she was joking when she asked me how I made the pink paint I was using. Story 62. I had to tell someone which primary colors to mix to make green. Story 63. I had to explain to my friend that when she feeds her dog breakfast and he goes to the bathroom a few minutes later, he did not just poop out the food he just ate. He pooped out the food that he ate the day before. Story 64. When I was in culinary school, someone asked me if their water was boiling. It was bubbling, so I said yes. Story 65. Had to explain to a kindergarten teacher that the entire world did not vote in the United States presidential election. Story 66. Incremental tax brackets. A colleague at my work thought he would make less money if he received a raise. Story 67. I had to explain to someone that New Mexico is in fact part of the United States, not a part of Mexico. I assume they failed geography. Story 68. I had a conversation with our friend last month who asked, because I am pregnant, what our plans would be for our baby's belly button. When I asked what he meant, he clarified that he wanted to know if we were choosing an innie or outie for him, as that is supposedly the result of where you choose to have the umbilical cord cut. I could not believe he sincerely thought that, and he was horrified when we explained that some of the umbilical cord has to fall off on its own after birth, the sweet summer child. Story 69. How online scams can easily deceive people, especially elderly individuals. Story 70. Having someone tell me the football game I am watching is not live because it is dark here in Florida while in California there is still daylight. Time zones confused them. Story 71. My grandpa asked where South Korea was when I told him my sister was studying abroad. Grandpa, I've never been to Asia. Me, Grandpa, you fought in Vietnam. Grandpa. So? Me, sir, that's in Asia. Grandpa. Really? I guess I have been to Asia. Story 72. That 90 seconds is the same as 1 minute and 30 seconds. This person was yelling at me about there not being a 90-second preset button on the microwave. I showed them how to use the 1-minute preset, the 30-second preset, and how to program it for 1.5 minutes. Story 73. A local manager once invited themselves to a team-building event I was holding for a group near their location. The problem was that I had to explain why a 51st person could not attend the dinner at a place with a strict 50-seat capacity. The restaurant in question was the Witchery in Edinburgh, and it was quite in demand at the time, so the manager really wanted to go. They actually used the phrase, "Do you know who I am?" when I kept asking who had invited them, because we both knew no one had. I kept playing dumb and pressing. I had to bite my tongue when they asked if I knew who they were. Many comedic replies went through my head, but I quickly dismissed them and chose something less inappropriate. Story 74. I had to explain to a 22-year-old friend of mine, when I was 18, what ovulation was. We are both women, and she had no idea. Story 75. I have a coworker who is completely opposed to any renewable energy. I was talking to him one day about solar farms and the need to invest more in maximizing the efficiency of the panels. His response was, "What happens to the Earth when we absorb all the sun's rays?" It took about 30 minutes to explain how the sun works and that the interior of the Earth is not heated by the sun. He is in his late 60s, a retired Air Force pilot, and also retired from Lockheed Martin as a mechanical engineer. Story 76. She said, "You saw September 11th? You saw the planes hit the Twin Towers? You saw it with your own eyes?" "Yes, along with a dozen other people on the roof of my building." I don't think she believed me. Story 77. Cold sores are caused by the herpes simplex virus and are contagious. They are not caused by stepping on tile barefoot. Story 78. Not me, but my husband and his brother. The brother got divorced at 42 and promptly started entertaining a number of younger women in their 20s. My husband said, "I hope you're using protection." And his brother replied, "No, these are good girls. They don't have anything." My husband responded, "Yeah, but you don't need to be impregnating all these women." His brother said, "No, I can't. It's my biological clock and all that." It took some conversation and research to prove to him that men can still father children at 42 and even well into retirement age. Story 79. Zoo volunteer here. The Canada geese currently roaming the giraffe exhibit are not placed there for the giraffes to eat. Story 80. I had to explain to my former partner that the penis does not have a bone in it. He could not understand where the bone would go when it was flaccid. Story 81. That resting on your laurels does not mean sitting on your butt literally. Story 82. I was amazed in my old workplace at how many young adults, around their early 20s, could not tell the time from the wall clock. Story 83. My cat lost one of her legs, and a year or two later had a litter of kittens, one born with 3 legs. My sister thought the kitten inherited 3 legs from the mother, whose leg was amputated. Story 84. That fat-free almonds are not a thing. I work at a grocery store. Story 85. The white fluffy dandelions that you blow away are the same flower as the yellow dandelions. Story 86. When I was 19, I explained to a middle-aged woman that Jesus was not blonde-haired, blue-eyed, spoke English, and was from America. Story 87. The answer to the job knowledge quiz was literally in the material provided with the quiz. The whole team, on days when we have to retake our quizzes, asks, "Corkscrew fork, what's the answer to this one?" When I show them where to find it, they get upset and go ask someone else. An honorable mention goes to repeatedly explaining how to round numbers up or down when doing inventory, as the system does not accept decimals. I can at least tell myself that they probably have not thought about math since leaving school. Story 88. Our office opens at 8 a.m. That means I open the doors at 8 a.m., not when you arrive 25 minutes early and bang on the door. Story 89. This person was told as a child that they have to lock their chickens away when it rains. Otherwise, the chickens will open and lift their beaks up and drown. I laughed harder when I realized that she still believed it. Story 90. The difference between small and far away felt like I was Father Ted for a minute. Story 91. When your air conditioning and furnace filter gets clogged, you don't turn it over and use the other side. Story 92. A friend of mine who grew up in the countryside in Ireland told me that butter was not dairy, but cheese was. I asked her what she thought butter was made from. Story 93. My ex-husband. I kept using his debit card to buy lunch for his office and act like a big shot. I kept asking him to stop, but he continued. One day he came home from work upset with me because the card was declined, and it embarrassed him. I explained that we didn't have enough money in our checking account to cover his extravagant generosity. He said, "But I always select credit and don't use debit." I had to explain to Mr. Big Shot Manager that either way, the money still came out of our checking account, and that is why I kept telling him the debit card was only for household purchases. He thought that by selecting the credit option, the card magically became a credit card and not a debit card. Story 94. To my eldest's father, he was convinced his landlord was paying $5,000 a month for his bills. He showed me a bill, and I then had to tell him that his landlord is not paying his bill and actually owes the energy company $5,000. Story 95. When coronavirus first hit the United States and there were no real treatments or vaccines, I caught it and developed lung clots. I had to spend a week in the hospital. Numerous people on the floor I was on died. The man in the bed next to me was under an oxygen tent. He fought with every single person who came in to check on him, refusing to believe that he had coronavirus. He thought everyone was lying to him about his condition. He died on about the fourth day I was there. To this day, I hear people say that coronavirus does not exist or never did, or other unfounded things. I have to turn away or ignore them on any platform to avoid reacting violently. Story 96. That Nazareth was not a country and that Israel was not a city. Story 97. One time at school, I am a teacher. The electricity went out completely. We were organizing for the children to be picked up, and messages were being sent around by staff running everywhere. One teacher asked me why they could not just send emails around. I said the electricity was off. She said yes, but we can get our emails on phones. I said yes, but the email servers are downstairs, and the electricity is off. She said yes, but our phones are working. I said, but the servers are not. She threw her hands up and walked off saying I did not understand. Story 98. There was an old woman who lived across the alley from me when I was a kid. She had several cats and used to talk to them constantly, in a normal conversational way. While this was very cute, I had questions. I asked, "Why do you talk to your cats so much?" I was about 6 years old. She replied, "Cats understand every word we say. They just can't talk." I said that was not true. She sat in her lawn chair, looked at one of the cats, and calmly said, "Butter, come sit with me." I was amazed when the cat walked right over and sat on her lap. That was the day the old woman explained to me that cats understand everything. They just can't talk. Story 99. The smell in your dish sponge and dish rags is caused by bacteria. You need to wash them because they do not clean themselves when used with dish soap. Story 100. I can't have a conversation with you or take your requests while I am in the middle of a song on stage. I have speakers all around me. They are loud. I am concentrating on my performance and making a connection with people in the room. I can't understand anything you are shouting at me, and no, yelling louder is not the solution. If you have a request for the musician, wait until the set break, then ask them. Also, ask for one song. If they do not know it, you can ask for a different one, but if they do not know that either, just thank them for their time. We are not jukeboxes. If you do not like what we are playing, keep it to yourself. You chose to come to our gig. We did not come to your living room. Story 101. I had a housemate who was convinced that running an empty air fryer would burn the house down. Never mind that the owner's manual says to do it, and of course you would not do it unattended. Story 102. You cannot stick a metal knife in a running toaster. My ex was toasting waffles and wanted to add chocolate to them while they were toasting. Story 103. A pound of lead weighs the same as a pound of cotton. Story 104. Trying to explain to the information technology department that emailing me instructions to fix my login issue would not work because I could not log into my email. Story 105. Taxes. You have to pay taxes on the items you purchase. No, I cannot just make the tax go away. No, I cannot include the tax in the price. And no, I am not going to call someone to make it happen. This is jewelry retail in a state that very much pays taxes on nearly everything. Story 106. That American middle schools are not placing litter boxes in the restrooms for students to use. I am very tired. Story 107. Cows do not produce milk all the time. Just like humans, cows produce milk for their babies. Story 108. I had cancer in 2011. I am fine now and I shave my head regularly. One of my colleagues last week said that I must be sad to have no hair because I had cancer. I had to explain to her that my hair grew back. I said, "Look, I have eyebrows and there is hair on my arms. I choose to shave my head because I look better that way." Story 109. My brother, who is 13 years older than me, thought the word meant someone who never finishes their projects or tasks. I had to explain to him the actual definition. Story 110. One lovely day, I commented aloud to the ex about how the clouds looked as they flowed up and down through the contours of a river valley. She was amazed. When she told me what was astonishing to her, I was surprised too. She thought clouds did not move, as if they were fixed in place. She was in her 40s at that point. I had nothing to say about that. Story 111. I was on the Peak Tram in Hong Kong, and a group of United States students were riding with us. They asked me and my friends where we were from because of our accents. We said South Africa. They said, "Where is that?" My friends, it is one of the only countries in the world where the directions are baked into the name. How do you not know what South or Africa mean? I am not often rendered speechless, but that is one of those occasions. Story 112. A coworker not only thought that chupacabras were real, but that they were well-understood animals, as well known to science as the goats they prey upon. She was in disbelief when I explained they are cryptids, similar to Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. Story 113. I had to explain to a middle-aged man that if he books a flight for 0:45, he will be leaving in the middle of the night. When it is dark outside, yes, like when you are sleeping. In fact, 12 a.m. is indeed the middle of the night and not lunchtime. He refused to listen and booked an overnight departure. I could not convince him. Story 114. That just because I am Hispanic does not mean I am Mexican. She thought that Hispanic was only used to describe Mexicans. My family is from El Salvador. I was in my early 20s and she was in her late 40s. Story 115. The small packet in the beef jerky that says, "Do not eat" is not a spice sachet. Story 116. As a passenger in my friend's car in a parking lot, I noticed someone about to pull out in front of us. I pointed and said, "Watch out. This guy is reversing." Sure enough, the other driver pulled out, and my friend was like, "Wow, how did you know?" Because his reverse lights were on. His what? His reverse lights. The white lights on the back of the car that come on when you put your car in reverse. My friend was mind blown. He had no idea. This wouldn't have been so bad if he wasn't literally driving me to the driver's test center to do my road test. And he was the one who taught me to drive. Story 117. When showering, you should wash your anus. Many people do not wash this area, and it is unhygienic. Story 118. That men and women have the same number of ribs. They were convinced that all men have one less rib than women because God took Adam's rib to make Eve. They were shown pictures of skeleton diagrams to prove that this was false, but they insisted, "No, I don't believe that." Story 119. I had to explain to a woman in her 20s that urine does not exit from the vagina. Story 120. My boss's wife was learning how to use a computer. She typed the numbers 1 to 9 and then asked how to type the number 10. We responded very diplomatically. Story 121. I live on an island, and many years ago, I met a visitor who argued with me that it was not necessary to take a ferry to travel to the island. He kept telling me he had not taken a ferry and that I was wrong, until his wife told him he had slept through the ferry ride. Honestly, I do not judge him for being wrong about the ferry, but I still think about how he was unnecessarily rude about it. Story 122. This is my mother's story, not mine. When her neighbor, who was pregnant for the first time, asked my mother, who already had children, how the baby would be delivered, my mother, thinking she was joking, replied, "The same way it got in there." The neighbor genuinely did not know how that had happened. Story 123. Went to a trade show recently. We had a bunch of small but nice giveaways, and some pricier ones for interesting people and potential customers. A few hours in, we had to put the expensive things away because adults were standing around arguing about why they should be allowed to just grab a $50 item off the table. Story 124. I had to explain numerous times to my husband that his suitcase could not weigh more than 23 kilograms and that it was the airline's policy. 25 kilograms was not an option. Story 125. I am an engineer for a natural gas utility in a very large United States city. Years ago, our department hired a recent engineering graduate, and I was partly responsible for onboarding him. We became good friends over that time, and one day, while a few of us were having lunch, the topic of chicken eggs came up. He was not participating much in the conversation, which was unlike him, but during a pause in the talking, he said, "Isn't it strange how some eggs have chickens in them and others do not? How do they even know which ones to put in the cartons?" Needless to say, we thought it was a funny joke at the time, but we soon realized he was serious. I think the reason was his cultural background or something similar, one where fertilization was not really taught or even discussed. He had a hard time living that one down. Story 126. A chai latte does not contain any coffee. She thought that because a latte is typically referred to as coffee, a chai latte also contained coffee. I had to explain that latte is just an abbreviation for cafe latte, and latte actually means milk. Story 127. How stamps work. My partner thought they were just for decoration. Story 128. We were teenagers, but a boy I knew said Asian girls had sideways vaginas and that if you spread their legs, they would close. Apparently, you had to push them together to open them. Story 129. If we inverted the polarity of the shop's air intake fan to be an exhaust fan, we would not all suffocate. I worked in a very large aerospace machine shop. For 8 years, I requested the air intake fan be reversed. Nothing happened. There was no acknowledgement of the request. For 8 years, I worked in a warehouse full of burnt metal smoke, vaporized coolant, adhesive vapors, and other harmful fumes. The air intake sock was at the highest point in the warehouse. It mixed fresh, cooler air with the hot, gross fumes, causing the whole shop to be filled with smog. The highest level manager was convinced an exhaust fan would extract all oxygen, leaving us literally in a vacuum. He never expressed this until an engineer on his last day would not drop the topic, and the reasoning slipped out. By the end of that day, fumes were exhausted. We all died, obviously. Sarcasm. I did not do the explaining, but I did overhear the debate. Permission was not given. The plant manager left early on a Friday. The fan polarity was changed. The engineer never came back. The manager took weeks to notice what had happened, despite the staff constantly improving health from having cleaner air. Sarcasm. Story 130. How come it did not rain above the clouds when it was raining below them? We were on an airplane when a friend asked me why. People around us started laughing quite a bit. Story 131. What type of meat comes on a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich? I was a waitress and had a party of 40. Larger parties had a preset menu. The person making the reservation selected the menu items in advance, and we always placed a large chalkboard menu in the party room. This grown woman who had managed to keep herself and others alive long enough to have grandchildren spent 10 full minutes questioning me about what kind of meat comes on a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, not what type of bacon. She fully acknowledged that bacon was an ingredient. She could not comprehend that bacon was the meat of the sandwich. Story 132. That cursive is not another language. This person saw cursive writing and commented on me being bilingual. I had to explain that the words I had written were, in fact, still in English. She did not believe me. Story 133. I had to tell a group of 18 to 20-year-old British teenagers how to eat corn on the cob. A tour guide bought some for everyone, and 5 of them were completely flabbergasted about how to eat the corn while it was still on the plant. Story 134. That Spaniards were European. My mom is racist, and we had a discussion when I told her her hate for the Spanish language is strange since it is technically a colonizer's language like English. She got confused, and I pointed out Spaniards are Europeans and thus generally white people. She snidely said, "Well, that is your opinion. I had my laptop and she is technologically inept, so I searched for images of people from Spain and then covered the search bar." I called her over. Me, "Hey mom, would you say these people look like us?" Mom, "Yeah, of course." Me, "Would you say they are white?" Mom, "Yes, I would." I showed her the search bar and asked her to tell me what it said. She was annoyed with me for that. My husband, then boyfriend, was just watching us go back and forth like it was a tennis match. Story 135. When I had my tubal ligation at 30, I was surprised by the number of women who said, "Oh, so you're not going to have a period anymore, right?" Even my licensed optician boss, who had been a licensed practical nurse at one time, made that comment. Story 136. If you cannot make it to an agreed upon appointment, please call. Do not leave me wondering if something happened to you. Do not arrive 2 hours late and pretend nothing happened by starting small talk. I still cannot believe I had to tell her that yes, I would indeed like to be informed. Story 137. What is the difference between iced fruit tea and hot fruit tea? Story 138. The difference between a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine and a documentary aired on One American News with a views expressed disclaimer. Story 139. The Earth was bigger than the moon. Long story short, this was the beginning of the end of our marriage. He and I had an argument in front of the kids during the entire 5-hour drive. He was telling the kids how wrong I was to correct him. Story 140. Basic human decency. That hitting and yelling were not okay during a disagreement. That breaking things is not a healthy way to express anger. What domestic abuse is. That a person can definitely be an alcoholic and not live in a cardboard box on the side of the road. That watching pornography multiple times a day, including at work, probably indicates an addiction. I could go on. This is all about the same person, my husband. I wish someone had explained to me what a narcissist was when I was in my early 20s, and that he knew all of this and was pretending not to know so he could further manipulate me. Story 141. Recently, it was the difference between every day and every day. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.